Conditions May Not Apply, a fanfic of a fanfic, written by Beezus Zebus, read by Distracted by Books. Author's note. This is my little daydream of where the fic may end up, absolutely not canon to the fic, it's just a little idea. This was written after chapter 113 of Conditions May Apply. To be clear, this is not canon to Conditions May Apply. This is just where my brain goes when I daydream about what might happen in my favorite fic. Nothing I write has any indication on where Cinnamon may be going with Conditions May Apply. Please enjoy. Shota was worried. The students had been back in school for 2 days since the sports festival. 2 days, and every red flag he had noticed in Midoriya over the course of the semester seemed to have grown 10 times larger. The boy was even jumpier than usual, which was downright concerning, and if Shota had to guess from the bags under his eyes, the kid probably hadn't slept a wink since the sports festival. The other teachers had noticed as well. Zashi had mentioned the kid zoning out in class, to the point he'd worried Midoriya was dissociating, and even Cementos had mentioned his concern over the boy. His stomach churned, and it took everything in him not to pull Midoriya aside and demand to know what was wrong. He knew cornering the kid during school hours would just make him shut down, but he had a feeling ignoring the issue would be worse. At least he was supposed to meet Inko Midoriya with All Might on Thursday. He'd keep an eye on his student until then, and maybe, if he's lucky, there will be a good opportunity to bring it up. He was going insane. Actually, clinically insane. That had to be the answer. Izuku knew there was no avoiding it. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't come up with a solution to avoid revealing his living situation. But the anticipation was going to kill him, and he felt like he was going to throw up every time he tried imagining what would happen once his teachers found out he was homeless. All Might was going to be so disappointed in him. Once he learned that his own mother believed he was too useless to bother with, there was no way he'd still want Izuku as his successor. If he couldn't keep the people who were supposed to love him around, how could he possibly be a hero worth carrying All Might's mantle? Would anyone really want a useless Deku saving them? Izuku felt pathetic. All Might would take one look at him after finding out the truth and see that he'd made a mistake. He couldn't be the hero All Might wanted him to be, let alone the hero he needed him to be. He was too damaged, beyond repair, and he had wasted the number one hero's time. And Kami, Eraser? His teacher was going to expel him. He'd lied to the man's face. Hell, he'd legitimately committed fraud more than once, pretending to be his mom. He was a criminal, and the moment Aizawa found out, he would be kicked out of UA at best and arrested at worst. He was a criminal. He was actually a criminal. How on earth had he deluded himself into thinking he could be a hero when he belonged in a jail cell? And if somehow he didn't get arrested, he'd be put in foster care. He wouldn't last 3 months. All Might was going to take his quirk back, and Izuku would be a quirkless Deku again. Best case scenario, he'd be stuck with a family that ignores him completely, but more likely, he'd end up with people as bad as his classmates at Aldera, if not worse. If they didn't kill him, he'd end up killing himself. He had to do something. He couldn't let everything he'd worked for be destroyed. He had promised to stick around to see things through, but if the best case scenario led him to being in jail, how many people would he be failing? If he stayed in hopes that things would turn out well only to be carted off, then he would be leaving so many people in the dust. It was a safer bet to cut his losses and continue his career somewhere else. Sure, he had friends here. He had people he would miss, but he couldn't be selfish. He had been doing that for too long. He just doesn't deserve to be selfish. So there really was just one option for him, wasn't there? He needed to disappear. He'd write a note to All Might, give the man his quirk back, and tell him he deserves a better successor. And then he'd move. Maybe he could go to Tokyo, one of the bigger cities where one random vigilante wouldn't even be noticed. There's plenty of neighborhoods that need help over there. He could still help people. He'd just have to settle for doing it illegally. He was already a criminal. Sure, he wouldn't have any of his friends or his contacts, and he wouldn't be able to talk to Eraserhead ever again. But it's what he had to do. It was better than the alternative. After fighting with himself for days, finally on Tuesday evening, 2 days before his whole life was going to fall apart one way or another, Izuku plucked a few pieces of hair from his head, placed them in a plastic baggie, and started writing a note. All Might, I'm sorry that you're finding out through this note, but you wouldn't understand if I tried to tell you this in person. I can't be your successor. Wednesday after school, Izuku placed the note on All Might's desk. Tucked under some papers, he knew the man wouldn't be grading for at least a couple more days. He tried not to make it obvious when he was saying goodbye to his friends that this one was so much more than a see you tomorrow. Hopefully they'll all forget about him soon. The moment Shota came into homeroom on Thursday morning and didn't see Midoriya in his seat, he knew he'd messed up. He never should have waited to talk to the kid. He hoped it was a fluke. Maybe he was just sick. He knew it wasn't. He managed to make it through homeroom without alerting the class that something was wrong, though it was clear they were unsettled by Midoriya's absence. He left 10 minutes early, placing Ida in charge, and as soon as he was out of view of the students, he booked it to the teacher's lounge. He slammed the door open, startling the only other occupant in the room. Aizawa, what seems to be the matter? All Might spluttered, dabbing his chin with a handkerchief after a short coughing fit. Midoriya wasn't in class today, Shota replied tersely. All Might furrowed his brow at that. We're supposed to be meeting with his mother today. Maybe he's just sick? He supplied optimistically, but his tone betrayed his true worry. Shota sighed in frustration, running a hand through tangled black hair. You saw how the kid was acting this week. There's no way he's just sick. There's something going on with his mother. There has to be. And Midoriya doesn't want us to find out, so he's hiding. I'll see if I can reach young Midoriya or his mother. Why don't you alert Netsu so he can keep an eye out? Shota nodded. Kami, he hoped they found Midoriya soon. By the end of the school day, Shota felt like he was going to explode. No one had been able to get a hold of Midoriya or his mother, and after a bit of digging into Mrs. Midoriya's situation, they were only faced with more bad news. The apartment listed as Midoriya's home address had been occupied by a different family for nearly 3 years now, despite the fact that Yagi swore he had dropped the kid off there multiple times. No other apartments in the complex or even nearby were leased under the name Midoriya. Further digging led to the discovery that Midoriya Inko left her job years ago, and all of her current financial accounts were associated with banks in America. So this woman had left Japan, who knows how long ago, and had seemingly abandoned her son at the same time. Shota was so angry. Did this mean that Midoriya had no contact with his mother? It certainly seemed that way. But then, who did Yagi talk to on the phone after the USJ incident? Either way, they should have looked into this situation far sooner. Now they had no idea where Midoriya was, or what mental state he was in. More than anything, Shota couldn't shake the dread that something terrible was going to happen. Nezu immediately called in Tsukachi, and a missing persons case was filed for the boy. Every hero was meant to be on the lookout for him, and various teams started to search the city. The problem was, They had no leads about where the kid could be staying. Even Nezu, a master of tracing people through CCTV footage, couldn't determine where the kid goes after school. Shota had to give the kid props. He was good at evading attention. He couldn't help but wonder where and why he learned to do that. Telling the rest of Class 1A that Midoriya was missing went about as well as one would expect, and Shota was left with a nasty headache and a heavy heart. He just hoped they would let the pros handle it. These kids didn't need to be doing their teachers' jobs for them. In between his classes and meetings, his attention was briefly stolen by the news that Mount Lady had left significant collateral damage in her most recent fight, resulting in multiple destroyed warehouses. Shota barely registered it, but it stayed buried in the back of his mind. He had more important things to focus on for now. He couldn't breathe properly. That was the first thing Izuku noticed when he came to. When or why he'd lost consciousness, he didn't know, but his chest felt restricted, as if he was wrapped up far too tightly in Eraser's capture weapon. His nose and mouth filled with dust every time he breathed in, and the resulting coughing fits left his chest feeling more and more constricted with each breath. The next thing he noticed was the pain. It felt like he'd been hit by a truck, or maybe 15 tons of steel and concrete. Izuku tried not to panic. He really did. But when he attempted to shift his weight and he felt the concrete around him shift as well, he couldn't help the sob that escaped him. He knew he was breathing too fast, and he was going to pass out if he didn't calm down. But all he could think about was how he was stuck and he couldn't breathe or move. He was pinned down and there was nothing he could do. Kami, how was he supposed to get out of this? No one knew where he was. No one would even think to look for a person in these abandoned warehouses. Not even the homeless population took up shack in this section of the district. The buildings were falling apart and generally more of a hazard than they were worth. That was exactly why Izuku decided to stay here. And now it was exactly the reason that Izuku was trapped and alone and no one was going to find him. And he couldn't breathe. He wasn't supposed to go out this way. He didn't want to go out like this. Izuku's vision faded in and out, and despite his panic, he somehow managed to be surprised at his last thought before he succumbed to the darkness. I don't want to die. 2 days. Midoriya Izuku had been missing for 2 days, and none of them had any leads on where the boy could have gone. It was like he just disappeared. Shota wasn't sure how much he could take. After almost losing Ivy, after losing Oboro, he thought maybe this would get easier. The uncertainty, the fear, but it was only worse. Because Kami, Midoriya was just a kid, and the signs had been there the entire time. The kid needed help, and Shota and every one of the teachers at UA had just ignored it. What kind of heroes were they? He didn't think he had ever felt despair like he felt when All Might found the note. Shota had been waiting in the teacher's lounge for an update from Nezu and Tsukachi, Hizashi staying next to him and trying to reassure him the entire time, when across the room there was a shout and Shota flew onto his feet, running over to All Might's desk. The man was holding a note, attached to what appeared to be an empty Ziploc bag, in one hand, his other pressed to his mouth, tears welling up in his sunken blue eyes. Oh, Yagi whispered. Aizawa frowned. What is it? With a shaking hand, Yagi held the note out to him, and for what felt like the 100th time in 2 days, Aizawa couldn't breathe. All Might, I'm sorry that you're finding out through this note, but you wouldn't understand if I tried to tell you this in person. I can't be your successor. Not anymore. I'm sorry that I wasted your time, but I'm not worthy. If you understood the depth of that statement, I think you'd agree with me. I lied to you, All Might, more times than I can count, and I don't have a good excuse. I was scared. Scared that you would realize just how useless I am. My own mother decided she didn't want me and left me on my own. What kind of hero is so weak they can't even keep their own mother around? I was being selfish. I thought I could make myself into someone who was worthy, but I can't. There's nothing I can do to change that. You deserve a better successor, All Might. In the bag are a few strands of my hair. I'm prepared to give up one for all. Just please, make sure to choose more wisely this time. Thank you again for everything. I'm glad I got to be a real hero, even if it was just for a few weeks. I'm sorry for wasting your time, All Might. Please don't come looking for me. You won't find me. Midoriya Izuku. Shota's hands clenched the note in front of him, causing the edges of the paper to tear. His hands shook, but whether it was in anger or fear, he didn't know. All Might, what is this? The number one hero had tears streaming down his face. I just found it. I was looking for something on my desk and it was hidden underneath a pile of ungraded papers. He he must have left it on Tuesday before he left campus. Zashi had come up behind him, a steady hand settling on his shoulder. Sho, what's going on? Shota set the note back down on All Might's desk and tried to keep his breaths even. Go get Tsukashi and Nezu. I think we may have just found Midoriya's suicide note. Izuku had no idea how long it had been the next time he awoke. He was still trapped, but he felt a little more clear-headed. He took a deep breath and centered himself, and Ivy began to take stock of their situation. Their legs were pinned underneath a concrete slab, and any time they tried to move them, it sent spikes of pain through their back and legs, causing the rubble around them to shift. They immediately stilled. One wrong move and the debris might collapse around them. Their upper body was restricted by the small space, but wasn't directly pinned like their legs were, and their arms were completely free. It was pitch black, but Ivy gently felt around them with their hands, careful to avoid disturbing the rubble too much. After a couple minutes of blind searching, Ivy felt their breath catch in their throat as their hand bumped against something small and smooth. They carefully picked up the object and let out a sob when they were able to open it, illuminating the small space around them with the cracked screen of their burner phone. How lucky they were that the phone was in reach, let alone that it wasn't destroyed. Ivy wasted no time blinking away tears at the sudden light, hands shaking and vision fading in and out once again, and quickly pulled up the only two people they ever contacted with this phone. They were barely able to press send before their consciousness slipped away again. Ivy. Location sent. 3 days. It had been 3 days since Midoriya went missing. 18 hours since they found what they assumed to be the kid's suicide note, and they still had no leads. No idea where the kid could have ended up. No idea whether or not he was still alive. All Might had suggested they check Dagobah Beach, but Midoriya was nowhere to be seen. The entirety of Class 1A had joined in the search, despite Shota's attempt to keep them from doing so. These kids had already been through so much that school year, and now they were searching for a classmate they couldn't be certain was still alive. Shota had been surviving entirely off of coffee and desperation. Zashi had tried to get him to lay down, but his husband had never pushed. They knew how important it was to Shota that he saw this through. Between his exhaustion, various meetings, and the never-ending anticipation, Shota almost missed the text message. He frowned down at his phone as he opened it. Ivy. Location sent. He hadn't heard from Ivy since before the sports festival. They had hung up the hat to focus on getting their hero license. Shota's frown deepened as he responded. Eraser. Ivy? What's going on? Are you okay? Just as he sent the message, the conference room door opened and Detective Tsukachi stuck his head out. Hey, Eraser, did you just get a location from Ivy too? He asked, concern painting his features. Yeah, I did. Do you know where it is? Tsukachi fiddled with his phone for a moment before a look of confusion settled over his face. It's one of the warehouses that were destroyed in Mount Lady's most recent fight. There shouldn't be anyone over there. It was supposed to be completely deserted. The pit of dread that had pooled in Shota's gut deepened. I don't like this. We need to check it out. I agree. I'll set up a team and we can scope the place out. It took less than an hour to get a small team assembled and over to the warehouse district. The warehouse corresponding to Ivy's location was only partially destroyed. About a third of the building had been reduced to rubble. There was already a team from the city working on sorting through the debris. Shota and Tsukachi were quick to inform the lead about the situation. He was short and had a scruffy beard and brown hair, no obvious signs of a quirk. Well, this part of the district's deserted. Not very safe for people to be tromping around over here. We've just been cleaning up the rubbles best we can. I'm sorry, but did anyone do a scan to make sure no one got caught up in the rubble? Tsukachi asked. It's standard procedure. You should have infrared cameras in your equipment. Oh, well, I was told to just go ahead and start cleaning up. Figured they'd already done the scan before I got here. We have reason to believe that there may be someone trapped in the rubble, so our team is going to do a quick scan before your team moves anything else. Oh, sure. Just let me know if you find anything and we'll help out best we can, the lead responded. It didn't take more than 5 minutes for one of the heroes on the team to call out. I've got something over here. Definitely looks like there's a person trapped under all this rubble, and they're deep down. Who knows what kind of condition they're in, but they're alive. Shota shared a wide-eyed look with Detective Tsukachi. Shit. Shota had never felt so useless. He had been watching for nearly 3 hours, doing his best to support the rescue heroes as they cleared away the debris. But he didn't have a quirk that could help, so he was forced to wait on the sidelines while the other heroes did the heavy lifting. Whether or not it was Ivy under that building, the person down there had to be in serious condition by now, if they were still alive. 3 hours and 47 minutes after he received Ivy's text, a shout from one of the rescuers rang out. We found someone! We're gonna need a medic! Shota wasted no time running over to the hero that had called out. As he turned the corner, green flashed in his eye, and he stumbled, skidding to a stop just in view of the scene. Tufts of green hair peeked out from beneath the rubble. No, it couldn't be. There was no way. Another piece of debris was lifted away, revealing the young, freckled face Shota had been desperately searching for the past 36 hours. Midoriya! Shota stumbled forward, falling to his knees beside his student. The boy's legs were pinned between two large pieces of rubble, the kid's face and hair covered in dust and blood. Beside him, clearly having fallen from his limp hand, was a small flip phone, still open from where the boy had attempted to call for help, from where Ivy had tried to call for help. No. Shota shook off the thought. Whether Midoriya was Ivy or they had some kind of connection, it didn't matter. What mattered was his student, who'd been lying trapped underneath the ruins of an abandoned warehouse for nearly 2 days. The man desperately reached toward the kid, flashes of cloud-like hair and blue eyes, stained red, echoing in his mind. He laid a hand carefully on Midoriya's neck and breathed a sigh of relief when he felt a pulse, weak as it was. Dust-covered eyelids fluttered open, red-rimmed green eyes peeking up at him. Racer? Came the stuttered question. Shota gently swiped green hair from the boy's forehead. Hey, kiddo, it's me. It's Eraser. I've got you. You're going to be okay. Not a dream. Shota tried his best to hold back a sob at that, but it was of no use. No, no, it's not a dream. I promise. You're going to be okay, kid. He didn't know where it came from, but he tacked on at the end, "You're not allowed to die, problem child." Izuku, Ivy, smiled up at the man. "Can't get rid of me that easy, Racer." Something like acceptance welled up in Shota at that. There was no denying it. Izuku was Ivy, and he didn't care. He just wanted his kid to be okay. "Only in my dreams, kid." It didn't take long after their conversation for Izuku to lose consciousness again. Shota refused to move from the kid's side. He only shifted if the rescue workers needed to get by him. Eventually, one of the heroes came up to him holding a tattered blanket and a familiar beat-up yellow backpack. Eraserhead, "We've been pulling out multiple unexpected things out of the wreckage. A bunch of blankets, some clothing, even found what looks like a generator. It it looks like the kid might have been living in this warehouse. We just keep finding more things. He was pretty well established." Shota's heart dropped, and he buried his head into the hand not holding onto one of Midoriya's. Shit. Listen, they're ready to move the rest of the debris off of him, but they're going to need to move quickly. They don't know what injuries his legs may have sustained. We'll need you to step back. I assume you're going to ride with him to the hospital?" Eraserhead nodded, and the hero speaking to him gave him a small smile. "You can go ahead and wait by the ambulance then. This won't take long." Shota had to hold himself back from getting in the way, and it felt like an eternity for his kid to be loaded into the ambulance. Tsukachi was already updating the others about the situation, so he could focus entirely on making sure Midoriya was taken care of. Luckily, the ride to the hospital was uneventful. Shota made sure to text Tsukachi and Nezu, activating his emergency foster license so he could oversee Midoriya's care. He updated his husband too. Not every day you bring a kid home from a destroyed warehouse. Upon arrival, Midoriya was immediately taken to surgery. Shota felt like he waited days, but it was only a couple of hours before a doctor came to update him on the kid's condition. Hizashi and All Might had both joined him in the waiting room, his husband never once letting go of his hand once they arrived. For Midoriya Izuku, the three of them jumped up, rounding on the doctor so fast he had to blink. "I'm Midoriya's current legal guardian. These two are his teachers. What is his condition?" Aizawa said. "Well, you'll be glad to know he's stable. He had a few broken bones and minor abrasions, but luckily he didn't sustain any major blood loss. At the moment, the biggest concern is dehydration from being trapped for so long, but a few hours on IV fluids should clear that up. We were able to heal the breaks nearly all the way. He'll just need one more session and he'll be good to go as long as he takes it easy for a few days." The three men let out a breath of relief simultaneously. "Thank you, doctor. Can we see him?" Hizashi asked. Shota squeezed his husband's hand in appreciation. "Of course. He probably won't wake up anytime soon. His body was under a lot of stress. But you're welcome to stick around. I'll show you the way." The three men followed the doctor through the maze of hallways before reaching Midoriya's room. Shota entered first and had to stop in the doorway. Midoriya looked so small in that hospital bed. They'd cleaned up most of the dust and blood, but he was so pale. It was hard to believe this was the same kid as the vigilante he had worked with for 2 years now. But he could see it, looking back. Little moments where a bit of Ivy's confidence and sass peeked out from behind Izuku's timid exterior. Or those concerning times when a bit of Izuku's uncertainty and pain broke through Ivy's wall. Midoriya's skills in hand-to-hand combat and the almost unnerving resemblance to Ivy's own style of fighting. The two were so different, and it broke Shota's heart to know that his kid had been split in two this whole time. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? Ivy had started as a mask for Izuku to put on when he needed to be cool under pressure, one that had grown into a suit of armor meant to protect Izuku from the worst of the world, from the things that Shota would bet Izuku had already seen. What had his kid been through? He already knew that his mother had abandoned him years ago. Had Midoriya been living in a warehouse the whole time? Shota's mind flashed back to the moment so long ago in the dark warehouse, when he heard Ivy cock the gun in their hands. He had been so scared at that moment, and he wasn't certain that Ivy wouldn't have gone through with it if he hadn't been there. That Izuku wouldn't have gone through with it. Kami. How many times had he almost lost his kid? Because Midoriya was his kid. He'd felt connected to the kid almost from the moment they met, despite his inability to control his quirk, which he did remember reading about in the note Midoriya wrote to All Might. He'd get to that in time, find out what exactly that meant. But for now, there were more important things to focus on. He'd been so familiar and so painfully different at the same time, and Shota hadn't known how to correlate those feelings, so he had ignored them completely. But ever since he first felt those protective feelings for Ivy, Izuku had been his. And to find out that he'd been alone all this time, Shota would give anything to make sure he never felt alone again. It was another 5 hours and 37 minutes until Midoriya Izuku woke up in his hospital bed. Hizashi had gone home to feed the cats, and All Might had left to start building a case against Inko Midoriya with Tsukachi and Nezu. Shota had been dozing in his chair next to the bed when Izuku suddenly sat upright, breathing heavy and heart rate monitor going crazy. The kid's eyes darted around the room wildly before settling on Shota when the man squeezed the boy's hand. Sensei, Izuku broke off into a harsh bout of coughs, and Shota made quick work of grabbing the glass of water by his student's bedside and pushing it gently into his hands. Here, problem child, drink. Midoriya took a few large gulps before handing the cup back to Shota and looking around again. What happened? Why am I in the hospital? You don't remember? Izuku shook his head, brows furrowed. Mount Lady left behind some pretty extreme collateral damage in her last villain fight. She brought down a few buildings in the warehouse district. We found you trapped in the debris of one of them 2 days after the fight. You'd already been missing for one before the warehouse was destroyed. It took a few moments for Midoriya to process those words before the kid froze up, suddenly looking up at Shota with a terrified expression on his face. He pulled his hand away from Shota's, flinching as he curled into himself. Sensei, I'm really sorry that I lied, and I promise I was going to tell you, but I was so scared, and I didn't know what was going to happen, and I... Midoriya snapped his mouth shut when Shota held up a hand to silence him. He fixed his dark gaze on the boy in front of him for a few moments, heart heavy as he took in the uncertainty and fear coloring his kid's features. Kid, I'm not mad at you. That got a few splutters of disbelief out of the kid before Shota held his hand up again. Listen, we know about your mom, kid, and that you were living in that warehouse. I'm upset that you've been living like that, but I'm not upset at you. Understand? Midoriya, whose mouth had been hanging open mid-word, promptly shut his jaw and nodded his head slowly, confusion clear in his bright green eyes. But what about... I know about Ivy, too. Shota could have cried watching the way the boy in front of him flinched back at those words. This kid, his kid, was terrified of him, of his reaction. Midoriya had started shaking, crying silently, and was refusing to make eye contact with him. Please, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help people, and I didn't mean to start being a... I swear it would just happen, but I helped someone, and I wasn't just a useless Deku. The man sighed and carefully grabbed one of Midoriya's painfully scarred hands in his own again. Izuku. The kid froze, mouth snapping shut, and very carefully lifted his eyes up to meet his sensei's just for a moment. I'm not mad at you. I'm impressed, if anything, that you pulled one over on me like that, Shota begrudgingly admitted. Izuku was gaping at him again, and Shota lightly bumped Midoriya's chin with his other hand, prompting the kid to shut his mouth once again. And, more than anything, I'm glad you're okay, kid. You really had us scared for a while there. Green eyebrows furrowed in a pale face. I don't understand. Shota placed his hand on the kid's head, slowly ruffling the green curls. Give it some time, kid. You've got plenty of people who are willing to help you, Shota said as he gestured with his head to a table across the room from Izuku's bed, overflowing with flowers and presents and get well soon cards from his classmates and teachers. Izuku was silent for a few moments, taking in the sight before him, the visual proof that people cared about his existence. His shoulders racked with sobs he tried to hold back, tears welling up in his eyes despite his effort to keep them at bay. Shota sat back, willing to let the kid take as long as he needed to pull himself back together. Eventually, Izuku sniffled and shifted, wiping his eyes before looking up at Shota for a moment and looking away like he wanted to ask something but didn't know how. He repeated this multiple times, growing more fidgety and nervous with each glance. Shota finally raised a single eyebrow, prompting the kid to speak. If you know about the warehouse and Mom, then what's gonna happen to me? Midoriya had curled into himself as he asked the question, fear and uncertainty once again clear in his body language. Well, kid, you have a few options. I do? Yes. UA has protocols for when students find themselves in need of a legal guardian. The first option is to become a ward of the school. You would become emancipated, and the school would provide you with an apartment and cover all living expenses during your time at UA. He paused, waiting for Izuku to nod that he understood. If you prefer to go a different route, there's always foster care. UA has a list of trustworthy families who have taken in students before, so we'd be able to place you with someone thoroughly vetted by Nezu. It was pretty obvious the boy was uncomfortable with that idea. Are there any other options? Shota curled his lips into a minuscule smile at the boy's hesitance. There is one other option. UA teachers are all required to have emergency foster licenses and can choose to get a normal foster license as well. There have been cases where students in need of guardians were taken in by one of UA's staff members, most commonly their homeroom teacher. Midoriya looked up at him with wide green eyes, confusion and disbelief, and the tiniest spark of hope dancing in his gaze. What does that mean? Shota did his best to look reassuring, but he was sure he just looked constipated. He wished Zashi was here to help him, but he knew it needed to come from him, or this kid would never believe it. Izuku, if you would like, Hizashi and I, that is, my husband, Present Mike, want to take you in. He wasn't expecting the loud sob to come from the boy in front of him, who was suddenly curled in on himself, hugging his legs to his chest as tears fell at full force, shaking his head violently. No, you don't. You don't mean that. You can't mean that. Don't lie to me. I just to make me feel better. I'd be nothing but a burden to you. You don't want me. I don't need your pity. Izuku finished with a shout, hands shooting up to pull at his curls, breaths coming too fast as he hyperventilated. Shota's eyes widened. He never expected this reaction from his kid. Was it really so hard to believe that Shota wanted him? That he cared? Carefully, he guided Izuku's hands away from his hair and held them in his own, and began guiding the boy through some breathing exercises. When Izuku had finally started breathing properly, Shota ever so slowly wrapped his arms around his kid, observant for any sign that he was uncomfortable. Instead of pulling away, though, Izuku latched onto the front of Shota's shirt, burying his face in the man's shoulder. I'm sorry, the boy sobbed out. Shota just shushed him, parting one hand through green curls and riding out the rest of his kid's tears. When Izuku had finally calmed down, Shota pulled away, just enough so he could look at Izuku's face. He took a moment to figure out what to say, wanting to get this right. Izuku, I care about you, and I have for a long time. Knowing that you're Ivy or that Ivy is you doesn't change anything, and Hizashi's been attached since I first told them about Ivy. Kid, you've been through so much, and you've been through it alone. I want to make sure you don't have to do it alone anymore. You've trusted me with your life on the field. Can you trust me with this too? Izuku was silent for a few moments, mulling over Shota's words. Eventually, he opened his mouth and hesitantly responded, hands still clenching the man's shirt. Are, are you sure? Shota smiled his nicest smile, the one that was so small but said so much more than he could ever say. Positive, kid. You can't get rid of me forever. Izuku let out a small laugh at that, eyes still wet with tears. Then, then please, I don't want to be alone anymore. Shota pulled his kid back into a hug, and if a couple of tears leaked from his own eyes, no one else ever had to know. Then you won't be. No conditions, no strings. I've got you, Izuku. End of story.